Okay. All right. Can anybody hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. All right. Okay. If you're here, you can put your name into the chat so I know you're here. And we're ready to start. So I'm gonna go to the schedule, talk about the schedule and what's up for this week and next week. So I'm gonna share if I can find it. There we are. Hopefully, anybody see the AP1 lecture schedule? Yes, maybe. Give me a thumbs up or just say yes.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you. Okay. So we're in week 4. Today is February 8th. And we're going to cover chapter 4, which is the tissue level of organization. And we're going to talk about basic tissue types and inflammation this week. And exam 1 is on the schedule. But we missed a couple days on last week. Thursday and Friday classes were canceled. And I know not many people showed up for the supplemental instruction. So what I'm going to do is move exam 1. It will open on Sunday, which is February 14th, I think. And then it will remain open for Monday the 15th and Tuesday the 16th. It'll close Tuesday night. So I think that's over Valentine's Day. So that'll be kind of a special exam. But so you've got, you'll have 2 days, and in those 2 days, you can only take that once. So you'll have to find a nice quiet hour. It'll be about 35, 40 questions. You'll have 1 attempt at that. And it'll include multiple choice, true, false questions. Some you may have seen before, others will be new. You'll also have to write a little bit on some essay questions. And so that will show up. The most important chapters for exam 1 will be chapters 2 and 3. And I'll go over that a little bit, but it will include some stuff from chapter 4. So you've got to get through chapter 4 this week. Okay, so we're going to work on chapter 4 for a bit, and then we'll talk about the exam again. The exam, I think that will be an hour, and it's really important that you have good Wi-Fi, so that if it cuts out in the middle, it won't let you re-log in. It'll only give you that 1 attempt. So make sure you've got an hour where your family is locked in a little room and they can't bother you, and that you have good Wi-Fi. And so we'll get that. Okay. So then this week, we're going to finish up with chapter 4, or we're going to do chapter 4. And this is tissue level organization. And this is tissues are just groups of cells. And there's lots of different ways cells are organized into tissues. There's over 200 types of tissues, but they fall into 4 general classes. And these are epithelial tissues, muscle, connective tissue, and nerve tissue. And so we're going to introduce those today. Your lab or your textbook goes through describing, maybe 50 tissues in chapter 4, and I'll give you where you find that one tissue and this other. I'm not going to give you pictures of tissues or ask you about this type or that type of epithelial tissue. I would like you to know them as 4 classes for the lecture, and where you would find those classes and what those classes typically do. Okay, so that's really kind of the important part of that. Knowing individual tissues and knowing them more broadly is something we do in the lab, but that's usually done with a microscope, or for this week, we'll do it as a series of pictures taken with microscopes. So we'll look at it that way. So let's go to your textbook. So there's a limited number of words I'm giving you for this week, and then just description of those 4 tissues. I want to go over the textbook this week because kind of point to the important parts of that. And so again, let me share and steer you to the right direction. Oops, I should have the chat open here. Let me do that. Okay, if you don't have your name in the chat, put it in. I check the chat for questions every once in a while, so I don't know. That's why I have it open. Okay. All right. So here's the anatomy and physiology textbook. Chapter 4. Here's over on this side is the outline of chapter 4. Particularly pay attention to this first thing, the types of tissues. This goes over the 4 types, and here's a little diagram there. Like I said, for the lecture exam, I'm not going to give you pictures and have you come up with names, but I would ask you about what features belong to what tissues and where would you find those tissues. So it would be more questions about it. And so these 4 tissue types, what we should know about them are kind of general locations. And so 2 of them are 2 groups of tissues are very diverse. The epithelial tissues is a diverse group of tissues found all over the body. Any body surface, your skin, the inside of your mouth, the inside of your lung, any body surface is lined with epithelial tissues. So these form lots of linings, and they also form all the glands. So epithelial tissues can protect underlying tissues. They secrete things like mucus or fluids or hormones. They absorb things like in the digestive tract or through the lungs. Wherever we interact with the environment, wherever we have a lining, it's always epithelial tissue. They're made of lots of cells, and they're very active tissues. They go through mitosis a lot. They heal well, but they can look very different, but just piles and piles of cells. So this little diagram here under epithelial tissues, that's a huge pile of cells, okay? So there's dozens of kinds of epithelial tissues. Okay. Likewise, there's dozens of types of connective tissues, but they look completely different and are found in different places. Connective tissues support, they connect things, they form structures, they're involved in transport. And the structural feature is that they have relatively few cells, and the cells produce a matrix or a ground substance, a non-cellular material like a fiber or a solid or a fluid. And it's that non-cellular material that does the job. And it might be storing energy or storing minerals or forming a structure. But it's the cells just make the matrix and the matrix does it. And so these look very different. There's fat, there's bone, there's cartilage, there's fibrous tissues. They look completely different. They're all over the place. The skeletal system contains bunches of them. All the organs have them, even soft organs have them. They make tendons and ligaments and things like that. Okay, so 2 big diverse groups of tissues. Okay, then we have muscle tissues, and there's only 3 types. And the muscle tissues, the feature that they have is they're made of cells, and the cells can shorten, and they shorten forcibly to produce movement. Okay, and there's only 3 types. Skeletal muscles attach primarily to the skeleton, and the cells are big and they're voluntary. We can activate them with our brain so that we can move an arm or a leg, or we can speak. And so mostly they're moving parts of the skeleton, very big tubular cells, very distinct. Okay, in our organs, we have much smaller muscle cell called a smooth muscle cell. It's very plain looking, where skeletal muscle is striped or striated. And these cells are never attached to the skeleton. They form kind of a layer in organs like the stomach or the intestine or in a blood vessel or in the airways. And they can contract and produce movement, but the movement is not voluntary. You can't consciously move your stomach, a muscle. It works a different way, an involuntary way. And then, of course, we have cardiac muscle, which is kind of intermediate between smooth and skeletal muscle. It's found in the heart. It pumps blood. So fewer types, active cells, it's all cells. They don't heal that well. They don't grow that well after a certain time, but they're very active in that they produce movement. And then nerve tissue. Nerve tissue is all cells, but the primary cell is a kind of a neuron. That's a cell that's can be excited and can receive and send messages and control other structures. There are other cells there, but it's the neuron that does the work. Really primarily found in the brain, spinal cord, and then in some peripheral nerves. Okay, so this introduction here is important. And then if you look at the introduction of epithelial tissues, the introduction of the connective tissue, the introduction of the muscle tissue and nerve tissue, that will be enough to kind of give you a good idea of what these do. You don't have to memorize the different types of connective tissues for the lecture exam. You don't have to memorize that epithelial tissue types for the lecture exam. That's lab stuff. And I'll give you a limited set in lab, and the textbook will help you for that. But in this chapter, there is a nice section that I would like you to know on tissue injury and aging. So let's go there. And so this is all tissues kind of respond in similar ways to similar things, whether it's muscle or nerve tissue. One of the things that they respond to in similar ways is that infection and physical injury causes inflammation. Okay, and so if there's some sort of injury here, the cells nearby will start releasing chemicals. Okay, that will cause inflammation. One of these you probably know, it's called histamine, and we use drugs called antihistamines to control inflammation. And so histamines will cause blood vessels nearby to have more blood flow in them and to leak more. And so they'll leak out fluid that will contain things that fight infection. And the histamine will also attract cells of the immune system that fight infection. And so this is really important. Inflammation can stop infection. It can kind of get rid of foreign bodies that are, intrude into the tissues, but it can also cause further damage to the tissues. So sometimes we have to limit inflammation. So that's a big thing. There's a nice section on aging here, and then there's a nice section on cancer. We'll talk more about cancer later, but it's good here is where we first get our initial look at cancer. And in cancer, normal body cells, they lose control of the cell division process. And so the division becomes more rapid, and you get the formation of a mass of cells that are dividing rapidly and not doing their job. And that forms a little tumor. And sometimes that tumor will become more and more dangerous if it starts spreading out into other areas. Okay, so those are the sections of the textbook that I think are really important this week. Does anybody have any questions? Okay, maybe. All right. All right, well then the last thing I wanted to do is to talk about getting ready for the exam. And so I'm gonna, well, that's not right. Hold on. I wanna go back here. Let me share. I have a little PowerPoint on the exam. Maybe I don't. Oh, shoot. I've lost it. Oh, no, there it is. Okay. It's just not where it should be. Okay. So studying for the exam, one of the first things I want to say is a lot of it is just vocabulary words. If you know what the words mean, that's the big thing. If you're unfamiliar with the words of anatomy, you're in trouble. And so, each study guide from each week has a list of words. Each chapter has a list of words. That's an important thing to look at. And this is a key thing with this is understanding. Okay, this is not an intelligence test. That's not problem solving. This is a memory test. And so when you're working on stuff like this, one night won't do it. You have to plan, and it's repetition. And so that's, okay, I'm going to have this plan and I'm going to practice these things over and over. And so that's making a plan, doing the preparation, and then can you stick with it? And so success for that is a matter of how much time we put in, and how well we can do that. There are parts of these that are where, it's a little bit different, where it's kind of a sequence of things you have to know, or maybe a little problem solving. And so for some of these things, you have references like your textbook or the animations I've shown you that are on Moodle, or maybe the lecture. We also have a supplemental instructor, or you can ask me or your classmates, but you have resources that you can use for the parts that aren't just simple memorization. But even with this, repetition is helpful. And so it's helpful to think about a week in advance. Okay, I need to up my game here. I don't need to spend 8 hours a day for a whole week. But in the beginning of the week, if I spend 20 minutes a day for the first 4 days of that week, I will start remembering those things much easier. And so, and then you can accelerate your studying as you get to 202 days before the exam. It's important to be realistic. Even if you put in 8 hours the day before, you won't remember it, because that's not how memory works. Memory works by repetition, and having this kind of spaced repetition is really important. And in addition to that, activities where you're more active are going to help memory more. So when you read, don't just read. Don't passively kind of scan the page. Maybe highlight or write in the margin, or have a separate summary sheet, or make a list of words or a list of questions. That can make reading more active and make you more likely to remember. Quizzing is an excellent active thing. Flashcards, using the practice programs like Quizlet or Kahoots, I think is what it is. I'm not sure, but those can be really helpful. Or working with a partner to do quizzing. Those are really helpful things. Okay. Then it's okay if you find this stressful, if you're a little worried, that's okay. That helps you get started. It's a reminder that it's important, that if you don't do well here, it may interfere with your career goals. But if you're too anxious and too stressed about this, that's not helpful. Particularly if you're distracted while you're doing it, that's not helpful. If you're having the same distracting thought over and over, what if I fail? What if I fail? What if I can't do it? And then you have to seek relief of that. And so one relief is studying, but also doing things that are calming activities, things like exercise, socially supportive activities. And if that's not enough to relieve those distracting thoughts, then there's places to get help on campus. We have counseling. You can ask me and I can direct you. Okay, so that's kind of a background for exams. Key thing is recognizing what's important. So chapter 1, there were a couple important things. The most important thing is this idea of homeostasis. We had the homeostasis movie. It's a big section in chapter 1. The idea that in your body, there's got to be small internal fluctuations, because your cells can't take the big fluctuations that are outside. And so you use a control system to kind of maintain a relatively stable, not constant, but small fluctuations inside your body. You do this with negative feedback. Okay. So you have a control system that has a sensor that detects change. And that's going to notify the control center, which is often your brain or a gland. And that will initiate actions that will oppose the change. Okay. So, this is the way the furnace or the thermostat keeps your house warm. Okay. You set your thermostat to 70 degrees. Whenever the temperature falls out of that range, the thermostat wakes up, sends a message to the furnace, and the furnace goes on, heats the house till the temperature comes back up. Okay. That's a negative feedback system. Okay. Your brain works the same exact way. Go ahead. Question? Oh, okay. so this is the most important idea in chapter 1. Then probably after that is a bunch of terminology and anatomical convention type stuff. The idea of anatomical position, these anatomical directions that always refer to you being in that. So superior, inferior, proximal, distal, these refer to that. This is more lab stuff. There'll be a couple questions on some of this, but I'm not going to ask you 20 body regions. That's lab stuff. I might ask you what is a plane, what is a body cavity, but I'm not going to give you diagrams on this exam. That's more lab stuff. Okay. So chapter 1 contains a lot of lab stuff, some stuff less important. Chapter 2, chemistry. You should know what an atom is and what an element is. I'm not going to ask you how many protons are in an iron atom. I'm not going to ask you that. I'm not going to ask you how many electrons are around a nitrogen atom. But I will ask you, what is a proton? What is a neutron? What is an electron? Where do you find them? That kind of stuff. Why is the number of protons important? I might ask you that. Okay. I would also like you to know, what is the difference between an ionic and a covalent bond? Why do chemical bonds form? I'm not going to ask you to name chemical reactions or to balance chemical reactions or anything like that. I will ask you about the different types of bonds. Probably for us, a big thing is knowing physical properties of different molecules, common molecules. Water is extremely important. Okay, we are, 2/3 water, so that's an important part. The characteristics of water, the bonds of water, the unusual properties, these polar covalent bonds give water. That's important. The organic molecules, there's far fewer of them, but these are important because they do important jobs. So these all contain carbon and hydrogen. Again, I'm not going to ask you about sucrose, but I might ask you about carbohydrates. I might ask you about a lipid. Why is a lipid a lipid? Particularly important, proteins. Okay, these are long chains of amino acids that fold up, and they do important jobs. So they form enzymes, or they form structural molecules, that kind of stuff. That's important. Nucleic acids, DNA and RNA. Okay, that's the code. DNA is the code that has the stored information for making proteins. RNA is involved in actually making the protein. Okay, so chapter 2, the chemical reactions, less important. More important, bonds and the important types of molecules. Chapter 3 goes over cells. Okay, smallest living thing, you have lots of different cells. You are made up of cells, billions of cells. Okay, cells themselves are made of smaller non-living parts. Okay, the first 4 of those organelles there are really important. Plasma membrane, nucleus, ribosomes, mitochondria. I'll ask about each of those. After that, less important. But I'm not going to give you a diagram. I'm not going to have you label a diagram. That's lab stuff. Okay, that's stuff that would come from lab. Okay. Processes that cells use, that's important. Okay, in all cells, they use their DNA to make proteins. Okay, and so this making proteins, this happens in a 2-step process. Okay, begins in the nucleus, ends in the cytoplasm. Okay, involves an enzyme in the nucleus. Okay, where they copy a piece of DNA to make a piece of RNA, and then that RNA goes out to that messenger RNA goes out into the cytoplasm, and their ribosome makes it into a protein. Okay, this happens in all cells. Okay, all cells have a nucleus, all cells have ribosomes, they all make protein. That's what cells do. Okay, now different cells will look different because they'll be making different proteins. That's the process of differentiation. That's what your book talks about that. And so skin cells make the proteins that are associated with skin. Muscle cells make the proteins associated with muscles. And that's how we get those different types of cells. Okay. Another thing all cells do is all cells go through this cell cycle where they go through these series of stages where they kind of like their life cycle where they grow and reproduce. So the growth and normal function, that's interphase, and that's divided up into different spots. And then the reproduction, that's mitosis, where they line up their chromosomes in the center and split them in half so that each daughter cell gets the same type of chromosomes. Okay. And then cells are arranged into tissues. Groups of cells form tissues. You should be able to tell me about each of these basic tissue types, where you find them, what are the cells doing, what does it look like, what are the features. Okay. And then organs are just formed groups of tissues. And so the simplest organs are membranes. Okay. And so here, I think this picture shows a mucous membrane, okay, which is made by these tall columnar cells. Some of them are secreting mucus, you can see. And then there's a little connective tissue underneath. Okay. So that's we're going to head off into organs after this. Okay. And then with inflammation. Inflammation is a damaged tissue. So some sort of chemical like histamine causes changes in blood flow. The blood vessels leak and you get the migration of cells. Okay, we all know inflammation. We know it. It causes things to swell up, get red and hot and hurt. And so that's going on there. And that's the response to the injury. Okay. All right, so that's the review. Caroline's going to go over a practice exam. That practice exam is available. And so that's going to happen Wednesday. Caroline, you want to say anything?
Just do your best to study for the exam. I know I learned about like studying techniques in one of my classes, and what helps is like if you can, rather than just reading over the information, if you can recall stuff by yourself or like think about a concept and maybe talk to yourself and say, okay, what is mRNA? I know that it's involved in transcription, that kind of thing. And come with on Wednesday with any questions, and Friday there will be an extra review session too if you want the extra practice for that as well.
This is what everything's about. It's all about practice and repetition. And so we all start from different places, but the more we practice, the better we get. And so it's amazing what you can store away in here once you spend enough time on it. So that's it does work. And so okay. All right, so lab is at home again this week. So I'll start posting stuff online. Okay, there's still time to do last week's lab quiz, last week's chapter quiz and forum. There's new chapter quiz and a new form available today. So look at that. I'll put a couple additional things there for review. So look at Moodle. Again, don't wait till the night before. Start working early, and so that's really helpful. That'll allow you to remember things. And a lot of this is vocabulary. So work with those vocabularies. Flashcards are very, very helpful. Okay. All right. I'm going to stop there. Hopefully, I'll see you later in the week, and we'll see how it goes. So okay.